Dig your hand in the land. We're gonna have a meeting, everybody.
Hey everybody, this is Kyle Hoffman bringing you this week's edition of In the Tractor Seat, brought to you by Minnesota Farmers Union. We've got Eunice Biel, a familiar face to Farmers Union, and Jamie Powers. They're both in the tractor seat this week to talk about rural investment to protect our environment, or RIPE. So thank you to the audience for joining us. We'll be doing Q&A at the end of their short presentation and a little bit of back and forth. First, let's get to know both of our guests this week. Eunice Biel is president of Fillmore County Farmers Union. She's been a longtime member and is a familiar face if you attend our lobby days and our fly-ins and various other events. She's also vice president of the RIPE Board of Directors. She's a frequent participant in the National Farmers Union legislative fly-ins and has served several times on the NFU Policy Committee. She was born into an active Farmers Union family, and her mother attended one of the first ladies' fly-ins in the 1960s. Eunice Farm, Biel Dairy, consists of 220 cows and young stock, and 1,400 acres of corn, soybeans, and hay, and 4 generations of her family work on her family farm. She's joined by Jamie Powers, who is the RIPE Agricultural Outreach Director. He worked 9 years as a social network analyst, first as an intelligence collector with the U.S. Army, and then as a senior and principal analyst in support of military operations in Iraq and Afghanistan prior to joining RIPE. Thank you both for being here, and I'll kick it to Uni here to give us a brief introduction and on with the presentation.
Well, thank you, Kyle, and good afternoon, everyone. I guess I wanted to say that I've been a Fillmore County Farmers Union member since before I was born. My parents were very active. And so about 2 years ago, I was asked by a farmer in central Minnesota to meet with RIPE, the RIPE staff, for rural investment to protect our environment. Before our meeting, and I inquired about RIPE with National Farmers Union, and they knew that they were working on voluntary climate policy and they were a solid organization. Minnesota Farmers Union has included voluntary climate change in our measures in our policy, and is also included in the National Farmers Union policy. Well, to make a long story short, I met with Jamie Powers and Eliza Wasserman, who is the CEO, and was drawn to their message of bipartisan, voluntary incentive for participation from farmers. I do not support policies that contain regulations or penalties for farmers. That is why I support their mission. I would like to turn this meeting over to Jamie Powers, Director of Outreach for RIPE, and he can tell you more about RIPE's mission and goals. So, welcome, Jamie.
Great, thanks, Uni. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen for our viewers today. Thanks to everybody for being here. And as Uni said, my name is Jamie Powers. I've been with RIPE for about 2 years as the Director of Ag Outreach, and prior to that worked with Environmental Defense Fund for a number of years with both farmers and their private sector advisors. So really excited to be in this field of work right now and to be talking to you today. Appreciate Uni's kind words, and thanks to all of you for making some time for this conversation about RIPE. We are, as our tagline indicates, focused on farmer-led climate policy that works for farmers. And I'll get to that farmer-led piece here in a minute, but it's really important for us to engage with folks like you all that are viewing this webinar to make sure that we're heading in the right direction. I want to introduce the steering committee. Those that are familiar with our work already may know that Minnesota Farmers Union is a member of the RIPE steering committee, and this is the group of entities that helps decide how we move forward, what this policy needs to look like. And I won't bother going through everybody on this list, but I will note, given that it's recorded, feel free to come back and visit with us about any of the folks that are on here, or and we'll share more as we go here about different ways that you can get involved. So the main idea that we're all about at RIPE is that growers have a really important role to play in climate change mitigation, but they should not lose their livelihood in helping to address that issue. And so we come at this from a standpoint of working to compensate growers for the full stack of benefits that you all provide to your communities and to society. So if we look at this stack on the right-hand side, this example is taken for cover crops in a corn operation. And you can see that a lot of the environmental benefits are coming from water quality, as well as soil health, avoided erosion, water conservation, and a number of other things. And all of that adds up to more than $100 per acre. If we look just at carbon farming payments, which is the main thing you're hearing about in DC right now, it's also where most of the conversation in the private markets is centered, is this carbon sequestration piece and paying farmers for that. You can see in that center stack that usually comes to about 15, 20 bucks an acre across the country on average. Now, when we look over to the left at the cost of implementing cover crops, on average, that's going to be about 30 bucks an acre across the country. If we then add to that this idea that when climate legislation is passed eventually, it is likely to lead to a lot of indirect costs for producers. So we might see the cost of fertilizer, fuel, chemical services, all that stuff kind of go up. Sorry, I'm just going to see if this chat is for me. Okay, great, not for me. And when we think about those indirect costs going up, that's likely for corn growers to be around 30 bucks an acre as well. So we're looking at $60 for this corn producer to implement cover crops and deal with the costs of pending climate legislation. Now, if all they're getting in return is payment for the carbon sequestration, you can see here that that's not nearly enough to make ends meet for this grower to participate in that program. So what we're saying is, let's go ahead and compensate based on the full stack on the right. And now you can see how growers can walk away with a net financial benefit from all the great stewardship that they're doing voluntarily anyway. So our current list of practices that we are talking about proposing as part of this program is listed here. Again, I won't belabor the point. You can always go back and view the recording. But we do try to stay with existing protocols to make it a really simple program design. The other thing to consider here is that all of these practices on the list have environmental benefits that add up on a per acre basis to at least that $100 level. And so that's how one of these practices makes it to the list. There are a number of beneficial practices that either have great environmental benefits but don't meet that threshold of $100, or there's not enough data to really demonstrate the value of that practice. And so those we're not able to add just yet, but we're happy to talk with you all about, different thoughts you have about things that will be beneficial to Minnesota growers. Wanted to highlight a few key principles of the proposals that we work on. One is, and you've heard me mention a few times already, $100 per acre for voluntary practices. And that is to reflect that full stack of benefits that you all are providing through your stewardship practices. And as Uni indicated at the beginning, we do not want to get into the business of mandating anything. We know that farming is a really local decision-making process, and not all practices are going to work in all places. So we just want to have a nice menu of options from growers to choose from, and we want to make sure there's something for everybody on the list. As I've indicated, the payment needs to reflect the public value being created by the practice, not how much the practice costs. If we stick to the cost share model, then growers end up needing to pay more than they get out of these practices, and it's just maybe something that we should be questioning in terms of a future approach to conservation in ag. We want to make sure it's equitable for all farmers, so no matter where you are, what you grow, how big your farm is, all these sort of different distinguishing traits of your operation, we want to make sure that you have access and the ability to equitably be funded through this program. It's important to our steering committee members that putting this forward for implementation does not impact existing Farm Bill programs. And so there's tons of detail to be worked out there, of course, as Farm Bill negotiations kick off in the next year or so. But something that's really important just to kind of highlight for MFU members. And then finally, just noting that there's no penalty for early adopters. One of the things that keeps a lot of growers from participating in existing conservation programs and some of the market opportunities out there is that they either need to add a new practice or they need to do a practice on new acres. What we're suggesting is that for this program, that would not be the case. If you are already providing the benefits of, say, no-till, and you've been doing so for 20 years, you should be getting paid fairly for all the benefits that that practice is already providing to your community. And so I think that's pretty much going to do it for me. I'll say in terms of thinking through ways for you all to get involved, I'd encourage you first to visit our website, which you can see on the screen here, riperoadmap.org. There you can find out how to sign up for the newsletter for periodic updates about what's going on in this work. You can connect with me and our other outreach staff to have conversations about how you can get more involved. And of course, we are going to be present at the convention at the midpoint in November. So we look forward to talking with you and Uni there in person. So thank you all for your time today, and I'll turn it back to Kyle.
Sorry about that. I was on mute. Great. Thank you, Jamie, for that presentation. So we'll move to our Q&A portion. I did put in the chat for folks who are watching that they can submit their questions in the chat. Obviously, if you have my personal number, you can text them to me as well. I've already got some texts coming in. So yeah, please submit your questions here and we'll curate, but I do have a few coming in right now. The first one is, where would money come from to pay farmers?
That's a great question. And I just want to say, first of all, Uni, if you have anything to add to something that I might say to this or any other response, please do jump in. So it's a good question because there are a lot of options on the table for Congress folks as they try to figure out how to fund the climate work, right? So we know that Democrats are thinking a lot about how to move forward with climate policy and climate legislation, but there's not a lot of clarity at this time about where the money will come from to pay for the different programs. Our general sense is that farmers should walk away with a win regardless of where that funding comes from. And if that money is going to be spent on climate, this should be part of the menu of options toward which that funding goes. So I think that's what we know at this point.
Sure. Sure, and that leads to another question I've got here. Lawmakers that are carrying legislation for you folks, what that level of support looks like, sort of what's sort of happening in either Congress or maybe locally. What does your legislative outreach look like?
Sure, so we are a 501c3, so we're not a lobby shop. We do have some amount of resources that can be put toward direct lobbying. What we tend to do on the Hill engagement side is work with government affairs professionals to make sure that folks on the Hill are educated about this work, that they are aware of the type of efforts that we're putting in. But we really lean on folks like Minnesota Farmers Union to work with their policymakers to move this effort forward. In terms of what we're hearing on the Hill so far, generally what I would say is that Democrats tend to be really supportive, those Democrats from ag states especially, excuse me, and Republicans tend to be non-oppositional at the very least, if not supportive. But what they are all asking for, Democrat and Republican alike, is farmers to come and talk to them about this, tell them what farmers are hearing about this, rather than from RIPE staff or various government affairs folks that we work with. So that's an important takeaway for this conversation, is just how important it is for folks like you all to be involved. And if you're seeing a win here, a potential win here for yourselves and your members, we can help think through how to mobilize and make sure that that voice is being heard on Capitol Hill. And Uni, I don't know if you have anything to add to that.
Yes, I was just saying that we're talking about a farmer advisory network, and if some of you would like to be part of the farmers advisory network, you're welcome to contact Jamie or myself.
Absolutely. Yeah, and as it relates to some of that legislative outreach and advocacy, I know, as we mentioned, Uni was on a lot of our lobby day calls and recently was on our fly-in calls and was a great voice for climate policy and various other things from a farmer perspective. So all this to say, you've got a great champion here on the call in Uni. We got to see it firsthand. So other questions coming in
We
here.
know it.
Yes, absolutely. What about land that farmers own that is in forest, buffers, CRP, acres, etc.?
Sure. So one of the things that we've talked about in terms of the buffers and the CRP acres in particular, buffers are certainly on the list of practices that we are currently proposing. What we're suggesting on the CRP side is that any acres that get retired should be allowed to be maintained, but at this ripe rate. And so we know as contracts run out, that's a concern that some of those lands will transition back. And so this is a way of maybe mitigating some of that risk. And then in terms of other sort of like forestry type ideas, we're generally supportive of a lot of the suggestions that have been put forth at the state and federal level about forestry and how they play a role in climate change mitigation and policy and things like that. But we don't have a specific, sort of outreach role for the forestry sector per se within agriculture.
Sure. One of the other questions we had come in, telling us more a little bit about your individual members and your organizational members. Do you have individual members? You've already kind of touched on your organizational members. Maybe describe for us what that membership looks like and what the makeup of it is.
Sure. So one thing that's really important to us is coming at this from a balanced perspective. So we want to make sure that as we talk about a bipartisan approach to climate policy, that includes this program as part of its essence, that we are moving this forward with farm organizations that are, perceived to be on both sides of the aisle. So that's a really important part of the way that we work, generally speaking. In terms of opportunities to engage, we've got a few specific ones. One is the steering committee, which I showed a little bit about earlier. As the question indicates, we've got organizational members and individual members of the steering committee. The ultimate goal is to have organizational members only, because that can be realizing the voices of thousands more growers than, say, Brandon Honeycutt is amazing. He's the chair of our steering committee currently. He's really active as a leader within national and Nebraska corn, but he's not there serving any one constituency, right? Like, he can speak to those that he knows and people that are like him and for himself. But unlike somebody like Uni, he can't speak on behalf of an entire organization. So that's why we're really heading toward organizational members only on the steering committee. The FAN, the Farmer Advisory Network that Uni mentioned a few minutes ago, is a bit different. We are thinking of that as like a farmers only club, right? That could be individual farmers. That could also be organizations that are looking to move this forward. But that is a place where, every other month, those folks come together and they talk about the latest stuff that's going on in RIPE. They talk about what they'd like to see from RIPE, and they get assistance from each other and from staff at RIPE about how to mobilize, how to work on engaging media, how to work on engaging policymakers, how to talk to other farmers or leadership in organizations, stuff like that. So that's kind of the rhythm and the two main touch points right now, the SteerCom and the FAN. The FAN, as I mentioned, is an every other month commitment, and the SteerCom is currently meeting monthly, both for an hour each time. So that's what it looks like. Did that answer the question, you think, Kyle?
Yeah, I think that was great. Yeah, thank you for that rundown. That was really helpful. Another question that might be backtracking a tiny bit, but would these payments be on top of CRP rate? In Fillmore County, CRP rate is $240 per acre on average. So it looks like we have a question coming in from Fillmore County, which is where Eunice from, but.
That's right. So right now, what our principles state is that we don't want to touch existing Farm Bill programs, whether those are Title I or Title II. And so we want to keep ourselves open to exploring how best to do that. if there should be touch points with certain programs, we want to make sure that, a key principle is stackability. So if it's possible, and if our grower leaders support the idea, then we want growers to be able to participate in existing programs as well as in RIPE, just like we want growers to be able to participate in private market opportunities as well as with RIPE. And so that stackability is kind of a key element of the principle of our work. How it actually gets rolled out in practice remains to be seen.
Sure. Great. Well, it looks like we don't have any questions currently in the chat, so I'm going to leave the chat open here, folks. If those of you watching, definitely submit your questions here. I'll turn it over here to Jamie and Uni maybe for kind of closing thoughts, and then if we have any other questions while they're wrapping things up, we can address those. But otherwise, it's been a great presentation. I know I learned a lot, and maybe kick it to Jamie since we started with Uni last time, and any kind of parting words or anything we can take from it here.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Kyle. Thanks for the great questions, Kyle and staff and everybody that's watching today. I definitely want to leave our final words to our fearless leader, Uni. Just really grateful to be here today. Excited to have folks visit the website, sign up for the newsletter, reach out to me and the rest of the outreach team, and we can figure out a way to engage with you personally as a farmer, as appropriate. And as I mentioned before, really excited to have us meet up in person in Minnesota on November 19th, 20th, or 21st, I guess, whenever you're able to shake hands with Uni or my colleague Matt Olaf, who will be in town. With that, thanks so much. I'll turn it over to Uni.
Well, thank you very much, Kyle and Diana and everyone for including us in this episode of the Tractor Seat. And it's ongoing. It's an ongoing policy. It's an ongoing. So if there's any ideas or anything, we're always welcome to hear things. And just hopefully that we'd also like to offer another resolution at the convention, because the last year it was done remotely and it was a special order of business. So I'm going to offer another resolution. So hopefully we can all pass that and include it in our policy. So thank you very much. And it was a good experience.
Good, great. No, and Uni, thanks for mentioning the state convention. We've touched on it a few times, but us staffers are in the thick of planning that. We're planning to have it here, as you mentioned, November 20th and 21st here coming up. I will be in person as of right now. We're planning away and hope that folks can make it, and we'll certainly have safety precautions in place as well too. So most certainly, look forward to seeing folks there and have really good policy resolution discussions. And
I would also like to mention that Jamie Powers is a member of Farmers Union, Minnesota Farmers Union.
Yes, which is great.
I suggested it would be a good idea.
Well, that's great, because
I listened to what Uni says.
And I didn't even include that in his little brief bio, so that's a good little tidbit about him. That's a very relevant tidbit for this conversation. So if we ever have Jamie back on, we'll add his service in Iraq and Afghanistan, and then we'll also mention that he's a Farmers Union member, because that's a key piece of the bio. Well, thanks for joining us. We actually are getting towards time here as it is, so thanks for joining us. Shout out to we were joking before we came on air, the dynamic comms duo of Janet and Janet. RIPE has a Janet in their office who works communications, and we have our own Janet Cubitt, who is our communications director, and they arranged for you folks to be here today. So shout out to them. They're not on the panel here, but I believe both of them are watching, so we wanted to give them a good shout out. So thank you to the Janets, and yeah, thanks you for being here today. Next week, we're going to have Tim Penny with Southern Minnesota Initiative Foundation, or SMIF, and he's going to talk about the Acres for Good program. So that should be pretty interesting to have former Congressman Tim Penny on. So if you want to learn more about Minnesota Farmers Union, you can certainly visit our website. It's mfu.org, or reach out to one of us outreach folks. We're happy to talk about membership and the various benefits and the things we're doing for for farmers in Minnesota and what National's doing nationwide. So thanks everybody for being here. Thanks again to Jamie and Uni. This was a good conversation and good to see your faces, and hope to see you in person soon. I know I'll probably be seeing Uni in person for sure here in the next few months at convention. So thanks, folks.
Dig your hand in the land.